Welcome to Fortify Your Future, a podcast for professionals with executive oversight of or aspirations of leading the safety and security function for their organization. My name is Ken Carrasco. I'm your host, and joining me today is Ralph R.C. Miles. R.C. is a leader with decades of experience in corporate security, emergency management, and risk mitigation. He currently serves as the Global Director of Security for BRP, a leading global manufacturer of powersports vehicles, employing nearly 16,000 people worldwide and operating in 130 countries. RC serves as a member of the Board of Directors for the CSO Center for Leadership and Development and holds the Certified Protection Professional designation from ASIS International. His awards include the 2025 President's Award of Merit from ASIS International, the 2025 Outstanding In-House Security Manager Director from the Outstanding Security Performance Awards for the United States, and selection as a 2025 Security Influencer by Security Journal Americas. RC, welcome.
Hey, Ken, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. Well, I've known you for, nearly 30 years, maybe.
Yeah, it's always nice when we're reminded of that, isn't it?
Yeah, tell us how old
we were a little better looking back then, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you on today, and I really appreciate your time. I'm looking forward to what we're going to be discussing. And in terms of the podcast, we always like to lead with value, as I call it. So let's start there. What's one thing that you can perhaps provide our audience that's actionable for them that they can take away immediately?
Yeah, thinking about it, and especially in light of your comments about how long we've known each other, I would say the biggest thing I always try to start with anyone who's in this field or getting into this field is really about expertise, and that's taking the time to learn the profession. The funny part is that most people who come into security don't come with that intent. They're not intentional about doing it. Maybe it's a progression from being a soldier, sailor, airman, marine into that, or being law enforcement, or being in emergency management through fire service or EMS, all of which are great. But if you want to get down to it, once you get into the private sector, you realize it's its own unique business ecosystem and has a very different view. And the amount of things that we work in, you and I worked in the past, and things that we know about our profession is a lot bigger than most people realize. That's the tough part. The good part is there is a lot of really, really good information available out there if you go to the right source to learn on how to do this job right. And so I always tell people, I have the saying with my team, experts never stop learning, be one. And so I would say that if you want to be good at something, you really have to be knowledgeable. Knowledgeable is your table stakes, knowing your business, knowing how your profession is supposed to work, knowing the ins and outs of it. That's table stakes. That gets you in the game. So I would say that's the best place for us to start. And that's what I would encourage anyone. That's my thing. I'd had anyone who's interested in thing of value, that will be it. Know your business and know it well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And appreciate in terms of, your mentorship over the years with me and the guidance that you've provided me. I know people, out there in the industry. I think I know if I had to do it all over again, I would spend more time building relationships.
Amen.
And so connecting with people is vitally important. People with the experience like yourself. Can people connect with you on LinkedIn? Is that okay? I want to make sure that we're okay with making that type of connection.
They certainly can. Anyone who has an interest in connecting with me, my LinkedIn page is up to date. It's under RC Miles. If you want to know my thoughts, I actually write articles, so you'll be able to access them there. I do, accept connections from people on LinkedIn. I try to respond. It gets a bit challenging, and quite a few people can reach out. But that's the best place to find out what I'm thinking or how to reach out to me through LinkedIn.
That's great. That's great. That's perfect. Well, hey, RC, we've talked a little bit before in terms of the way things used to be in terms of when you and I started out, navigating our careers, but things have changed dramatically and from a global perspective and, and especially relative to enterprise. So when we talk about some of the things that you and I have done, the things that you've done in an enterprise environment, What do you see today globally in terms of what's dramatically shifted, what's changed? What are the things that you're calling out in terms of what you're seeing as things that aren't just one-offs, but you're seeing sort of this change in how we need to do what we do?
Yeah, there are three areas, Ken. A little flashback. When you and I met, it was just it was before the war on terrorism and after the war on terrorism. We all remember how much that changed our profession, right? We got real busy after that. But there are three areas that seem to be really driving things in our profession right now, at least in my opinion. The first one is the change in geopolitics. The second one is the willing to use what I call targeted violence on non-state actors. And then the third one I would say to you is AI. A lot of talked about those individually. So let's start with geopolitics. In the last 5 years, maybe 6, we've been through George Floyd, COVID, war in Ukraine, plus all the political turmoil in between. We have seen the world change dramatically in the last 5 or 6 years and how we work in our profession. In particular, we are more and more pulled into the forefront like we've never had been before. George Floyd and COVID, that combination pulled the security professionals, people who are heads of security, like I was in my previous job at the AIDS Healthcare Foundation or here at BRP, pulled into discussions that we normally would not have because it was so catastrophic. More so even than the war on terror was. The war on terror was scary, but it was geographically isolated for the most part, and it was focused in the way it approached things. George Floyd and COVID hit entire societies. And so it changed everything. That combination, in my opinion, changed everything. It also produced a reaction that we did not see coming. In many ways, I think some of these elements contributed to this feeling of the need to protect ourselves in general, broadly around the world. This period of time has also been an increase in the renationalization of governments when it comes to their economies. Globalization is now not seen as a positive thing. It is much more maligned on all sides of the political spectrum. People are talking more about fair trade than they're talking about free trade. I know there's a long way to get to it, but the simple truth is that security, especially for those of us who have been operating internationally for a long time, has always been one of those things that you could do across borders. If you know what took your time, made the relationships that you just talked about, having relationships with professionals, you could work that way because the rules were accepted. That has changed. That has changed a great deal. We now are finding ourselves faced with some significant challenges that make doing business internationally very difficult. The first challenge is what almost appears like a reemergence of some kind of variation of great powers or Cold War activity, where major countries like the United States, China, Russia are all kind of pulling camps together and pulling groups together and engaging in geopolitical conflict. That's the first one. That's really complicated things because in some cases, businesses had to shut down operations. I'll give you an example. My current organization, we make snowmobiles. Russia was a really big place for us in terms of what we call playgrounds. We had to shut down our operations. There wasn't any choice because of Russia's invasion with Ukraine. That is a huge business impact. We had to looking at how we do business in Ukraine was looked at differently because it's an armed conflict. And we're not the company that gets involved in those things typically. In my previous job, when the Russians invaded Ukraine, huge impact. We had some, I think, 45 or 55,000 patients we had to take care of. And getting staff ready for that invasion once we realized it was going to occur was a major effort. But it changed the way the leadership had to interact. We had to change how we organized within Europe because of the challenge that occurred there. So when we were used to refer to it as EMEA, right, Europe, Middle East, Africa, you can't do that when you've got two armed groups going at each other, especially when one of them is Russia. So it changes the entire structure and how you approach it. Even just traveling to these countries as a security professional can be tricky. don't recommend a security professional go to Russia right now. Yeah, I think it's probably a bad idea. Okay. I think you might not find it, no matter what country you're from. If you're from a European country or Western country, or a country seen as hostile to Russia's actions in the Ukraine, you might want to rethink that. These are the sorts of things that change the dynamic, where we would not spend as much time talking about geopolitics. I've had multiple conversations with boards of directors and CEOs where we talk about nothing but politics and how it's impacting business. Politics has always impacted business, but never to the extent that it has now. Now add to that the increase in mercantilization, or perhaps I should use the term of territoriality when it comes to economies. Obviously, everybody understands the United States is increasing tariffs. We are increasingly more concerned about protecting our own economic interests domestically to the United States. We're not the only ones doing this. We get the biggest attention because we have the biggest economy. That's to be expected. But the reality is this is happening in many, many, many places. The Brits left the European Union for this exact type of reason. There's been pushback from countries like Turkey and from Hungary. Well, okay, so what does this mean? Well, what it means is that the ability to move goods, services, and interact with each other, all those rules are changing. We are a support function. We support the business. Suddenly we find ourselves being more involved in how we address those issues. How do we deal with the fact that we need to move product from Mexico into the United States, something I'm very familiar with right now, and the level of, I don't want to say hostility, but scrutiny that the US government is giving is pretty high. Anyone who does this knows this. Yeah. Same thing with the US going into other directions. Everybody's starting to, square off against each other. That's a big, big, big challenge. And it cannot be understated because it impacts our ability to do things. We operate in that business climate, so we need to understand how that impacts us. So that's the first one. I think that cannot be understated, from a macro level, because man, it's just making things tough all the way around.
RC, you were instrumental in developing our travel risk program at Cisco. And with people, one of those things in terms of the movement of personnel, business travel, it's pretty simple to say, okay, hey, look, we're modifying risk ratings according to the intelligence we're receiving, and you can mitigate that. People don't have to travel. There's reasonable alternatives for them to continue to conduct business. But what you're touching on in supply chain, right? When you're talking about moving product where things are being created and they have to go through these channels, they literally have to move from point A to point B. Are you seeing at least an investment in terms of our industry, the security industry, applying resources in that space? Do we have enough professionals in the supply chain so that we can effectively mitigate some of those things? Only the things that we have control over, right? I mean, because the things that you're talking about, the geopolitical implications of those things, we're limited as to what we can do. But products, we've got to move it from point A to point B, or there is no business. So what are your thoughts around, I would say, today's climate relative to supply chain and the resources and security professionals? Are you seeing investment in that space? I mean, are we doing what we need to do as organizations to adapt to those challenges?
There really isn't a choice but to invest more, because in certain cases you won't be able to get things through if you don't take those steps. So there's a couple of ways to look at it. We support, my current organization, I have a team that supports the regulatory requirements. For those familiar with crossing the border of the United States, there's something called CTPAT. Okay, CTPAT is a agreement that if you execute according to a certain standard, then it's faster for you to move your goods across the border, either from Mexico or from Canada into the United States. It came about after after 9/11, and it's a very effective means. It made things a lot easier. That plus NAFTA made things much easier, or in this case, the USMCA is the new agreement. So you don't have a choice, that you have to be able to execute these. Typically for us, from a security perspective, we're responsible for CTPAT. So we are very involved in making sure that we meet the CTPAT requirements so that we don't get stuff rejected because it isn't CTPAT compliant. And there is more and more scrutiny all the way around, either from CTPAT, from Customs and Border Patrol, or OEA, which is an international standard, where they're starting to ask more and more. They're doing more and more audits of things. It's that result, when you have more audits and more inquiries from the government, there's no way to get around it. You're going to have to invest resources. You can't do it on the fly because they'll shut you down. It becomes a business critical to be able to move the product. The other thing that's interesting is that I also work with an organization that's involved in trade, and not to speak out of school here, but I'm watching my colleagues here really have to work very, very hard to meet the changes in tariffs and trade that happen very quickly, mainly in the United States, but also in other locations. As one does, another responds. You have countries that are popping these requirements up and change them on fairly short notice. So the challenge there is for us to support those options, but more importantly, to be able to provide intel about what's coming around the corner, if you can. That's where it's getting really tough. These things used to be more predictable. That's not the case anymore, okay? They're pretty unpredictable, so you can't. And in some cases, companies are having to change literally the design of their product because of things like suddenly there's no more rare earths or certain magnets you can't get because one country says, no, we're not doing that anymore for you. And the minute that happens, that particular material is a critical component to something else. So you got to come up with a new design. You have to do it fairly quickly. So yeah, are we involved in that? Yes. Is it creating greater demand on resources? Yeah, but also greater demand in terms of time of the current staff to meet the requirements, to understand them. So it's not just more people or more technology, it's the amount of time spent on it is increasing dramatically.
Well, let's get into the second part that you had mentioned, and this targeted violence.
Yeah,
And
this one's scary.
yeah, you mentioned the assassination of the CEO from United Healthcare, and give me your thoughts on what you see in terms of the challenges there that you have. I mean, I've seen an increase in what's going on from an executive protection standpoint, and you see a lot of emphasis and programs being built up or started, resources that are being addressed in that. But give me your thoughts on what you see in terms of the larger picture of generally what's happening, what's changed relative to these types of incidents.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about this. You and I have been dealing with workplace violence in some capacity for some time, and we've seen the evolution of workplace violence, right? The days when it was the spouse or estranged spouse showing up at the office, or it was one employee with another, or things of that nature. The normal, what I would call, relatively speaking, the normal forms of violence, not stranger on stranger violence. We appear to have entered a different world when it comes to the use of violence. And the assassination of the president of the United Healthcare was shocking to all of us. You saw it on screen. The young man just walked up and shot the man from behind. It was right there in front of you. That's not the most shocking part of it. What's most shocking in my mind was the reaction when you look on social media, which is kind of an understated and unstated issue in our business. But the reaction was astonishing. People were cheering this idea. He got what he deserved. And for us, those of us who, you and I worked in executive protection, and for those of us who done this for a while, that was a really shocking thing to see. Wait a minute. You think it's okay to murder somebody that you don't agree with? And the answer was, yeah. And subsequent polls and communication from a mass media perspective have made it clear that a lot of people are willing to accept this. And I think that was best, verified, unfortunately, through the death of Charlie Kirk. we all watched this kid, young man got shot right there. And all he was doing what, most political types do in the United States, right? I mean, they were having debates in the United States, freedom of expression, the idea of, debate in the public square, which an idea which goes all the way back to the time of Rome and Athens, for crying out loud, was okay, not anymore. The willingness to use force against somebody that you don't agree with has increased to a level we probably haven't seen since perhaps Vietnam. I feel comfortable saying that. And the difference is that the ability, because of mass media and social media, to communicate these ideas out there really spreads it very quickly. And that is a big challenge for us as security professionals. We have to deal with the fact that you have to be monitoring these things. You have to be paying attention to these things. People posting aggressive and inappropriate language, lots of them, about your staff or your leadership, your organization, is something you can't ignore anymore. You have to pay very careful attention to it. And on top of that, you have to be able to explain that in terms of a protective intelligence assessment to an executive who may not actually see the threat something is real, because nobody wants to believe that they are actually being threatened by somebody else. If there is any silver lining in this, and I hate to say it, but perhaps the only silver lining I've seen is more than one executive have looked up and said, wait a minute, that could have been me. And so now they're taking a different look at it. So they are committing more resources. I've seen, I think I've discussed, boy, all of a sudden everybody's hiring executive protection specialists, right? And these things do come in waves. But the reality is that it's the environment that says it's okay to do this that's the most surprising. I don't know what it will take to turn that around. It did happen before, mainly as a result of the Vietnam War. But this seems to be a little different. It seems to have a greater life to it, and it grows faster, primarily because of social media. And so the ability to identify threats early and have a really decent program that can provide the right level of protection for executives is something you can't ignore. So we all see it. Like I said, we see more hirings, but more importantly, it's going to require change in mindsets from a lot of executives. And that is a sales pitch that can be pretty tough, because nobody wants to believe that people hate them that much. It's a natural for an executive to think, oh, why would anyone do that to me? I'm just so and so. And it can be tough to sell that idea.
Yeah, agreed. And I think when it first happened, and there was sort of this rush of interest from executives with regards to looking at protecting themselves, I said it then, and it's like, typically these contracts last for a year, 2 years tops. It's like, well, let's relook at this in a year from now, right?
Right.
Yeah, and see if those contracts get renewed, and that emphasis is there. I agree with you that it certainly has changed. It certainly is different. And I think in those instances, certainly the ones that you cited, there certainly were, I think when you look at, sort of peel the onion and you look at the circumstances with those individual cases, you see that some fundamental security things were not done.
Absolutely right. There were some fundamental things that weren't done, were not done in both cases. And in one of the cases, I think one of the people that was in charge was a colleague of mine. So I haven't actually spoken with this person since the event. But I would point out to you that in most cases, the executive is the one who gets to decide the level of coverage that they get. And you and I have both done this work for a while and know that some executives just don't want that. In fact, if you think about how they achieved their success, they achieved it by being able to interact with people. Their personality is their greatest asset. They want to shake hands. They want to get close. They want to be accessible to everybody. They want to be viewed as just like everybody else. Okay, if you're flying in a private jet, you're not like everybody else. But you can't tell them that, okay? Because they don't want to hear it. And I don't blame them. Nobody wants to. We all have a vision of ourselves as a human being, and it's really hard to overcome that. In both cases, I feel confident to say I wouldn't be surprised if the executive said, yeah, I really don't want this. And in which case it becomes a challenge for a security professional, because you can't make them take something they don't want. Now, for publicly traded companies, the only way to get around this, if you want to say that, is that the board of directors, can direct some type of coverage as a result of some type of professional survey, which can then be written off in forms of taxes. This is well known in the security industry. But for private operations, in the case of Charlie Kirk, there are things they could have done. I think everybody's talked about the ballistic glass they could have put up. He said no, he did not want to have that shield between him and the people he's trying to interact with, because he wanted that openness to be part of the engagement. That makes it pretty tough. Okay. And so I don't know what the answer is. In the end, the individual that you're protecting has the right at this point to say no, unless it's directed by some type of other legal obligation. President of the United States can't say no to his detail, because the Congress has written it into the law, to where otherwise a lot of presidents would say no. They flat refuse, right? So it's different from the private sector, but that's part of the challenge. Again, I go back to that sales pitch. You have to convince somebody of this problem. I'll close with one last one. I have a friend who was responsible for protecting, he was in the Army in Criminal Investigations Division, and basically his team was responsible for protecting a very high-ranking general. And he told it to me, and I won't ever forget. He says, these are the worst people to try and protect. I said, man, why? He said, for 30 years, most of these guys were combat arms, go find the enemy, fight the enemy, charging from the front, leading from the front officers. They've already been shot at. They've already been wounded. Some of them have done some really heroic and amazing things. They are naturally aggressive in a fight. And you're going to tell this individual, who is a leader extraordinaire of fighting soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, all right, if anything bad happens, we're going to run. Okay, how's that going to work? Okay, and he was right. It's a very tough sell. You had to really make them understand, no, if you don't do this, you are not completing your mission. And so they went through a lot of efforts with this, but that's the kind of mentality. They didn't get to where they are by doing what we want them to do. They got to where they are by doing the exact opposite of what we want them to do to protect them. Okay, so we have to find a way to convince them, can we do some modification here so that we don't have a problem? Or provide them, look, we have real intelligence here. Here are the people we identified that have said this. They may be here today. We need to do things a little differently. You can do it with good protective intelligence pitch. Here's who I know. Here's what we're doing. Can we do it this way? They become a little more willing to listen when they have good data. But if you just say, I'm going to put 4 people around you in a diamond formation and we're going to walk down the hallway here, they're going to look at you, why? Why do I need this? So you have to, I hate to say it, but there is a certain amount of salesmanship in this job. Whether you like it or not. Actually, there's a lot of salesmanship in this job. So.
Yeah, well, I always characterize it as you try not to come across as being persuasive. Rather, try to provide enough data that they can make an informed decision. And so that's always been sort of the approach that I've taken, or tried to have taken.
It's a smart approach. It's a smart approach.
Yeah, and it doesn't always work, but certainly a path that I've seen a little bit less friction with, I guess, is the best way to put it. Right?
You've been more successful than most at this. I've known you long enough to be able to say that. So
appreciate that. Well, hey, today technology, this is when we started, right? Is a big factor in what we're doing and how we're doing it. How do you see AI and some of the other technologies that you're seeing in your environment? How is it playing a role today as you see it, Marcy?
So I think of AI as an asset, not something to be afraid of. And I can talk about different kinds of AI. If you're a security professional now and you're not spending the time in a leadership, as leaders or downstream from that, learning how to make AI a part of your operations and how to use it smartly, you're not going to have a long future here. The truth is that AI's impact right now is in many ways like it was when the internet first came to being, the turn of the century, and when everything was a .com solution, because that's what it seemed like. .com for everything, hamburgers.com, you name it. But the truth is that this was an explosion of a technology that could make business better in many ways. AI is different in that it can actually do more than just being a source of communication or a source of revenue. It actually can produce and generate. So when I look at AI, I don't look at it as something that to be run from. I look at it as something to embrace and use. It's the transition from a horse-driven economy to a motorized economy like we had in the world in the early 20th century, right? This is not something you're going to stop. It's going to happen. It's already happening. The question is, how do we use it in our profession? There are some elements of this that are really good. Previous job, we were operating some pretty tough areas where crime rates are really, really high. We had camera technology that used AI for facial rec. Okay. And it was extremely helpful in dealing with some pretty dangerous situations. When the law enforcement would come around, we were able to provide them, okay, we found this person. I'm looking for somebody with a red shirt. Go in and type in red shirt. Boom, every red shirt person came up. Okay, here's the description of them. There he is. Click on it, and it could follow everywhere he was within our camera system. I mean, you could literally map out his entire movement process. Okay. That's where it was then. Now you could just say, I need you to find this, and the system would go in and find, AI can go in and find it for you and give you a diagram of everywhere they went. Jumping ahead to things like policies, procedures, analysis of data. AI is all great tools. So when I look at AI, I look at it as it's like a really, really smart intern fresh out of college. Has the master's degree in whatever, operational systems analyst, and you give it a question and it goes out and gets an answer. But like really most interns, they don't know the business yet. They don't have the experience. They don't have 5, 10, 15, 20 years of experience. They have 5 days or 5 weeks of experience. And so they will come up with an answer that sounds great on paper, but it's not going to work. Okay. And the job of experienced professionals is to look at that information. That's a good idea, but let me point some factors out to you. The other thing I always tell people with AI, especially for things like ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever other generative research AI you want to use, is always ask for the sources. AI will hallucinate. I have had that happen to me. I've asked it a question and it spit out an answer. I said, that doesn't seem right. Show me the source of this. And then I looked at the source. The source was not real. Now, that doesn't mean there's anything wrong. It's a system. It's a software. It's a process that's going to have glitches. We are all trained as investigators. I believe every security professional should be an investigator. If you're not really a security professional. Every security professional I know does investigations. Investigators learn very early on. You ask questions, and then you question the answers, and you verify. You don't take anything for what's just said. You take it because what's said can be backed up by other corroborating evidence. I told this to you before, talking about this, the old saying in journalism is, if your mother says she loves you, don't believe it until you have 2 confirming independent sources. You have to do that kind of with AI. It'll produce some great answers that look good on paper, but you need to challenge those answers. So the question isn't how not to use AI, it's why don't you use the tools you have that make AI work? If you are a trained investigator, you know how to ask questions. Taking the time to develop a set of questions that you want to ask AI and be very precise. Skills in AI don't require IT as much as they require a better command of the English language. The more accurate and specific your question is, the more accurate your answer will be. But always check the sources. So far, this worked out very well. I found times when AI has given me answers and I'm like, yeah, that's not right. And I look at the resource and it's not a good source. Or I have found times when I've asked AI to do something and something that would take you and I maybe hours of work, it spit out in 5 minutes. I mean, So why would I avoid this technology? I just want to be smarter about using it. So you do those things, ask smart questions, question the answers, ask for sources, do the stuff that any decent investigator will do, then you can make AI work for you in our profession. If you don't, if you just take it as gospel truth when it spits out an answer, comes up with an answer, you may find yourself in a situation where you're not very pleased.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I love the analogy of the intern. I think
Mm-hmm.
that nails it, no doubt. And like you, I've experienced challenges with some of the data and then questioning
Mm-hmm.
with the follow-up prompt, questioning the result. And then it comes back and says, yeah, Ken, you're right. I did omit this. I apologize. And then gives you more data, right? And so, yeah, it's very interesting, but I mean, that's a very important point that people need to be aware of and not take things at face value. So that's really critical. Well, that's
If,
great. I mean,
if you look at it as an investigator, right?
mhm.
And think of it that you're interviewing a witness or somebody with information, a subject matter expert, and you ask the questions and you are detailed in your questions and you've asked follow-ups and you challenge it, you're going to get better answers. But if you are going to be, for lack of a better term, lazy about it, yeah, I can tell you what's going to happen here. Okay. It's not going to go well for you. You're not going to like
Yeah,
it.
yeah, no doubt. Well, lesson learned. Hopefully, the audience will take away that important point. No question that we've got to leverage technology in our roles. At minimum, you've got to figure out, hey, how is technology impacting your role?
Amen.
I mean, for survival. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you have to be really be engaged and understand, how your role is being impacted. Well, hey, RC, in terms of moving forward, you've taken on this new role. You're still doing 100 other things, 1,000 other things in the industry. You're speaking. You're an author. What's coming up next for you as you're navigating forward? Where's your focus? With what you're doing today. And again, you're always engaged in the industry. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you find the time and energy. I'm always impressed by that. But what's next on the horizon for you in terms of what's coming out? Any little insight, tidbits of information you can give us? You got a new book, new article coming
No,
out.
for
Let
heaven's
us
sakes,
know.
please don't say write a book. I thought we were friends. That's a lot of work. I've got an article coming out. It'll be in Security Management Magazine this coming month about geopolitics and how we can apply some of what we just discussed, asking the right questions, the enterprise security risk management model, applying that to dealing with geopolitics to help executives understand, okay, what does this mean and how do I manage it? Because that's really what executives are looking for. The key with executives is that they're always going to default to the people they trust. So the sooner you build a relationship as a person who's going to be objective, honest, and accurate with your information with them, the more likely they are to trust what you're going to say. We are just providing data as one of many data streams. The question isn't about whether or not they believe us or even trust us. The question is how we earn the credibility with them. I think that's the important element that we always need to focus on. It's about being credible. Being accurate is important, but you also have to be credible. That only happens when you have taken the time to invest in the relationship. Regarding what's coming up next, well, I've got this new organization I've joined here. I've only been with them for 4 months, so I've got a bit of a heavy lift in the next few years as I get the team online. I'm going to be now my focus whenever I have a team is to make sure, as I said before, if anybody asks me what you should do to be good in our business, you need to be expert in your field. I said this earlier, which is experts are always learning, be one. So I've got to do that with my own team, not only demonstrating to them how we, by example, but also by providing what I've learned over the years to help maybe let them avoid some of the mistakes that I have made in the past. And yes, if I were going to write a book, it would be, here's all the things not to do. you know, it's just, wow, I don't know how I survived that one. Okay. So, but that's really the focus right now. Yeah, it's hard to believe it's been the number of years that we've known each other. It's been a very rewarding career, I must say that. I mean, there have been lots of hard times, many, It's part and parcel. Security is the first thing cut when the cost problems hit. That's usually the first place to start cutting is in support functions. People need to understand that. But the challenge is being relevant, and you get to do so many different things that are very interesting. I've taught self-defense training to staff members who are working in the Haitian National Prison in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. I've taken people into Ramallah, Palestine, and in and out of Iraq. I've helped our Ukrainian team get ready. I mean, the number of things that we are involved in that people don't realize always amazes me. In many ways, we and the HR function have one thing in common. We do a lot that people don't see. They just don't see it. So if you're either thinking about getting in this business or getting into this business, you are going to have a pretty interesting time in front of you. I mean, let's face it, all those years ago when we started, do you think we would have seen what we've seen now? Do you think we could have predicted this? No. Not at all. So it's a great challenge, and I'm looking forward to continuing to do it until eventually I decide I'm going to retire now. Let somebody younger and better at this step up and take the ball and run with it for a while.
Well, hey, RC, I always enjoy our conversations. Again, can't thank you enough for joining me today on the episode.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.